Welcome along to yet another episode, installment. I don't know what you want to call it, but it's in conservation with. My name is David Lindo. I'm also known as the Urban Birder. And for those new to In Conservation with, it's a series of Zoom interviews in which I chat with people who are movers and shakers within the world of conservation. And they don't necessarily have to be conservationists per se. Some people have just sort of drifted into this world and said something interesting or wrote something interesting or, whatever. And it's great to talk to those people and just get to know a viewpoint. So welcome along. And if you are watching this in the future on YouTube, please like and subscribe and tell all your friends and tell some of your enemies as well, because they could become friends after watching In Conservation with us. About 180 different episodes to watch with a load of different subjects ranging from flowers and plants all the way through to, well, whatever you want to think that's within a natural world even. So don't forget to tell your friends. Okay, so I also need to say that this evening, this afternoon, this day, wherever you're watching this and whatever time you're watching this in, has been sponsored by Cower Sporting Optics, who are the manufacturers of the Promenade telescopes, and Birds, Wildlife, and Nature, who are a tour company who operate amazing tours around the world for nature. So check them both out. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my guest today. His name is Jonathan Meiburg. He's an interesting character in that I don't know Jonathan, never met you personally, but you're interesting because when I sort of firstly saw your book, excuse me, which was all about Caracaras, the world's smartest raptors, I was thinking, first of all, I like the artwork. Secondly, Caracaras, no one ever really talks about them. I mean, I've seen them, but I've never talked about them, or never had any discussions about them. And also, I love the fact that you're interested or your path is kind of segued between arts and the sciences. So I want to talk to you about that because I think that this is what's needed really in our natural history world, in the world of conservation, more kind of outreach into other sort of disciplines, because often people in nature think nature, 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 conservation, that's what it is. It's like this. But in reality, it involves art, music, culture. It involves loads of stuff. It's all intertwined. And that's what a lot of us tend to forget, especially people living in urban areas, not realizing just how connected they could be and should be to nature. So, long introduction. Jonathan, how are you and where are you?
Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm doing just fine. I'm actually near Vancouver, Canada at the moment, so it's earlier in the morning. But I'm well. For one thing, I'm excited to introduce you to the world of caracaras if you don't know about them, because as David said, they're often not discussed, and I think they're about the. In fact, I'll say it. They're the best falcons.
Yeah, well, we need to talk about them in detail in a minute. But I was also quite interested in the fact that your first book, A Most Remarkable Creature, The Hidden Life of the World's Smartest Bird of Prey,
Yeah,
that was the same book.
yeah. This is this book. Yeah.
Right, okay, good. Okay, I'm just making sure that I got the right sort of information here. But what I like
Yes.
is the fact that you are also mentioning Mr. W.H. Hudson quite a lot, and he's one of my heroes. For me, W.H. Hudson, and there's been a couple of In Conservation With, in fact, one In Conservation With episode about W.H. Hudson. So please
Oh,
look,
that's great.
yeah,
Yeah, I'd love to read it. Yeah.
go back the back catalogue in that one or for that one. But W.H. Hudson, for me, was the original urban birder.
Yes. I think that's well, he for those of you who don't know him, and you may know him quite well if you've watched the whole talk about him, he grew up in Argentina. He was born there in 1879 and moved, or sorry, not 1879. I don't know where that number came from. He was born in 1834.
I know how you feel,
Anyway,
Jonathan. No worry, I'm
um,
with you.
but he grew up in Argentina and then he moved to England. and when he was in his 30s, and he stayed there for the rest of his life, was one of the founders of the RSPB. And he thought that he was going to uh, find people who were as obsessed with natural history as he was when he moved to England, but he actually found them quite hard to find, and spent a very long time sort of wandering around in the wilderness doing odd jobs in London, living in a boarding house. Uh, and but he was determined to bring some of the appreciation that he had for nature, which he just imbibed sort of by himself growing up. He didn't know people who were interested in it outside of Buenos Aires, where he lived on a farm. Um, and he wanted to bring this passion to others. And I believe he has a book called Birds in London, which is a pretty unexceptional sounding title,
I
but
have.
it's he just thought, I'm going to document what birds there are here in the city and what they're doing. And he tracks the movements of the crows throughout the day. He tells you about all the different places that you can find them, what they're doing. He was really way, way ahead of his time. And I think in some ways we're still catching up to him.
Yes, I revere him. In fact, next week or the week after next, I'm involved in a project to basically honor him. I'm doing a recording to be put on social media to honor this man. So it's really good that he's been mentioned in your books. Great.
Well, he also was one of these people who sat at the intersection of the arts and the sciences. He didn't like to call himself an ornithologist or certainly a scientist. He called himself a writer and field naturalist, which, if you've ever been to his memorial in Hyde Park, that's how it's listed. It says sacred to the memory of W.H. Hudson, writer and field naturalist, which is a title he basically invented for himself. And he wrote novels. Uh, Probably his most famous written work was a strange novel called Green Mansions, which was eventually made into a movie starring Audrey Hepburn and a young Anthony Perkins. Uh, it's not a very good film, unfortunately, but it caught the imagination of people in the early part of the 20th century, especially. And uh, he was resolutely not one thing. He thought that you had to use all the tools of art and imagination and science in order to understand where we really are and who our companions are on planet Earth.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And then, look, how many naturalists, how many field naturalists get films made from their books? I mean, come on. I mean,
Well, the Green Mansions is a funny story of this sort of Venezuelan runaway named Abel who runs away into the forests of southern Guyana and meets this strange bird girl named Rima who lives in the forest and can talk to birds and other animals and has red eyes and sort of almost purplish skin, and just lives in the forest canopy and is sort of kind of like Peter Pan does in Never Never Land. And he falls in love with her, and things end tragically. And uh, it's a real tearjerker of a story, but it contains all kinds of fantastic descriptions of creatures and landscapes that Hudson actually had to summon out of his own imagination because he never actually went to that part of South America. The only parts that he really ventured into were south of Buenos Aires. He went down to northern Patagonia at one point. So it's this, he's imagining the tropical forest as this place that he's always longed to be, and that's sort of like the absolute culmination of what the natural world can be, which in some ways, if you've been there, it really is. And some of his descriptions are very accurate, surprisingly accurate, not just to what's there, but what it feels like to be there. And then some things are completely fantastical. The forest is not as organized and neat as I think he would have liked it to be. And he also imagines creatures like packs of hunting leopards, which, so far as I know, have not been sighted.
that's true. You yourself have a parallel life as a
Yes,
recording musician. Uh,
yes,
you got two bands, the Shearwater and Loma.
yep.
Or was that
And
one?
Loma. No, they're two bands. Yeah, Shearwater is one band, which I've been doing since 2001. And we're working on a new record now. And then Loma is a band I've done in the last few years with a different singer. We released a record just this last year called How Will I Live Without a Body?
How how can you separate the two? Are they very distinctly different? I mean, then when I think of uh, artists working with two bands at once, I think of I think of what's his name in Blur and Damien Albarn.
Oh,
Have you
Damon Albarn. Oh, well, yeah. I mean, what
him?
he's a real model, in the sense that he just does what he wants to do and he collaborates with who he wants to collaborate with. And sometimes he's a cartoon, sometimes he's a flesh and blood human being, sometimes he's behind the curtain. Yeah, I really like his approach a great deal.
So what's your approach?
Well, like for Loma, for instance, I wrote the songs but did not sing them, or wrote a lot of the songs and did not sing them, and arranged, and it was sort of more in the background. And for Shearwater, I'm the last one standing. I mean, if I quit, it's over. So uh, uh, it's a different feeling when you're writing for your own voice versus when you're writing for another person. But to answer your question about art and science, I think it's all connected in that any big project always sort of seems to have the same phases to it. And science requires imagination in the same way that art requires discipline. It's um, you have to, there's a sort of a wool gathering phase, and you're trying to figure out what you're doing, what questions you want to address, what you're trying to say. And then you organize everything, and then you produce a bunch of raw material, and then you edit for a really, really, really long time. And eventually you get to the end. And all big projects seem to have this shape no matter what discipline you're working in. So it doesn't feel that different to me.
Yeah. I must say, guys, listening and watching this, that your bands have been praised. They're not like side projects, they actually are proper entities, and they've been praised
We're
by
real. Yes, we are real.
New York Times, The Guardian, BBC Radio 6, which is also pretty
Yes.
good to actually be praised on that. Not many people know that I had a band when I was at school. I was 13 years old and I had a band. We called ourselves Unrehearsed. And so at the time, a lot of electronic music was out. We were batrionic. So I had a little toy organ that was powered by batteries, and my mate played an acoustic guitar. By the way, we couldn't play a note, but I had this idea at the time. Why don't we record two things at once? So you do the guitar, I do the keyboard, and then we go back, and then you can play drums, and I'll do something else, and then we can mix it all together. Not realizing that had been done like 20 years before. Um, and we wrote such songs, or I wrote most of the songs. One song I remember quite clearly was called Scud in Space. And
Like a Scud missile.
it was way before I even heard of a Scud missile. Uh,
Ah, okay.
I don't know. I think I may have been sort of looking, I may have opened the dictionary and saw the word Scud and thought, right, that looks interesting, and used it as a title, Scud in Space. So that's one of my things. But unfortunately, all the songs I wrote, because I went through a phase, I wrote about 30 songs in about 2 weeks. And my friend was keeping them in his house, but then he married a woman who didn't like him having friends, and she ended up throwing,
Oh no.
she threw out all my songs, and she even threw out the recordings we made. So there's no evidence of me ever being involved in this, and I'm so
So
upset. I said you should have divorced her there and then, but he didn't.
I have to take your word for this then that this existed? Oh,
Right,
what a
so,
shame.
right, so. Anyway,
Well, can I tell you about Caracaras?
yeah, I was going to ask you actually, can you? Because I think many of us are itching to know what exactly makes a caracara a caracara.
Caracaras are just one of these fascinating groups of animals that are not very well known outside of the places that they're found. And where they are, they're mostly not, with one exception, which we'll get to, rare. They're actually quite common. It's just that, as you know, sometimes you don't notice the common things. It's you forget to talk about them in the way that um, crows in the city are some of the most interesting animal residents of the city, but many people don't think about them or think about what they're doing with their lives. And so the caracaras have this sort of double whammy of being common where they live and absent everywhere else. So they get ignored by the larger world and kind of ignored at home. So, but let me run you through a sort of introduce you to all of them. There's only 9 species, so they're really easy to get a handle on. And they're also super entertaining. I am a little worried about you actually with that crested caracara sitting behind you on that branch. But he looks like he's had a good meal, or she.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I hope
So
so.
so I think it's just digesting right now.
I hope so.
Okay. So this is the caracara, like the one that's depicted behind David there. That's the most widespread and well-known. This is a crested caracara. But you look at it and you think, gosh, this is a really strange animal. It looks like it's been assembled from parts of other birds. It's kind of got the wings of a turkey vulture and the legs of a chicken, and then the head of of a an eagle of some kind, and you just kind of can't make heads or tails of it. When you see it, people often ask, "What on earth is that?" And you often see it when you do in the company of other scavenging birds, other like this turkey vulture here, that this one's peeking out underneath. These birds are in South Texas. And crested caracaras occur all the way from you know, well upward into the northern United States these days, as we'll talk about more in a minute, all the way down to the tip of Tierra del Fuego. So they're all throughout South America and up into North America. But most of the caracaras live exclusively in South and Central America. And this is the one that really captured my interest in the first place. It's the cover of my book. This is the first ever illustration of this bird, which is a striated caracara. This illustration was made in 1775 off the tip of Tierra del Fuego near an island called Staten Island down there. And it was made by George Forster on Captain Cook's, I think, second voyage in the Resolution on January 2nd, 1775. This is the first known illustration of a caracara by a European ever. And what I really like about it, by the way, is that you can tell that he actually saw this bird, because not only does it resemble it, but it resembles the feeling of it. These are very inquisitive birds. Like all the caracaras, when you think of a falcon, you tend to think of, a peregrine. They're fast, powerful, kind of aloof. If you've ever kept one or known someone who's been a falconer, they tend to not do a heck of a lot besides hunt and eat. And caracaras are just almost the exact opposite of this. But there are some other weird falcons, though, that you may not have thought of, because we think of falcons as mostly being sort of models of the versions of a peregrine type bird. We think of hobbies or merlins or even weird ones like lesser kestrels. All the birds in that genus Falco that really radiated throughout the Miocene epoch through the grasslands that were spreading across the world at that time. I mean, you may have seen that falconers can crossbreed these falcons a lot, and do, and it's because they haven't been very far apart from each other for very long. They're really quite closely related. Even though that's most falcon species, they're not the deepest branch in the lineage of falcons. The falcon lineage also, at some deeper branches, includes some interesting birds that live almost entirely in South America, like this laughing falcon here, which is a snake-eating specialist of South American rainforests. Very cute little thing. And this bird, a cryptic forest falcon, which is from the Atlantic forests of Brazil, it was described in 2015. That's how poorly known the group of forest falcons is. They live in tropical forests. Research opportunities are wide open for these birds. They're generally thought to be kind of like accipiter type hawks, like sharp-chinned hawks or Cooper's hawks, or sparrowhawks. But really, that's kind of just a guess. They are secretive, seem rather clever, and anybody who'd like to learn more about them is welcome to write a book. These crested caracaras are not in South Texas. They're actually in the Falkland Islands, and they're standing in a macrocarp tree there, which is unusual because there aren't native trees in the Falklands, but there are some of these planted around farms and the one real town of Stanley. And these two are, looking quite handsome there. I really like them. This is the only contemporary illustration of Darwin aboard the Beagle. It was made in 1833, I think, by Augustus Earle, and it's just sort of the kind of drawing you'd make of you and your buddies on a trip, like a field trip, because everyone here is sort of caricatured and doing funny things. Darwin himself was wearing the top hat in the middle. You have to remember, he's a kid at this point. He's like 21, 22. And that's him talking to Captain Fitzroy. And you can see these guys are all bringing him stuff. There's, it says Tusk 2003 BC. The guy's bringing him a palm tree, and another guy's carrying what looks like a boulder. And Darwin would pay people to bring him things of interest. And this guy over here even looks like he's been sleeping off a drunk there. And he says the The least I can get for these is a tot with his hat full of shells. And this guy over here is saying, I've killed a fine specimen of flying monkey, shot 3 specimens of geese, and was very near being yaffled by a damn big bear. Well, he would have been lucky to get hit by a bear in South America because the only bears in South America are Andean bears now, which he would be unlikely to find aboard the Beagle because they're in like cloud forests in Ecuador and things like that. But he is holding a flying monkey there, and the dog's taking some kind of an interest in it. And what's funny to me about this is that there actually was something known to sailors at the time as a flying monkey, but it was striated caracaras. Sealers and whalers who'd been visiting the Falkland Islands for years at that point had been seeing these weird birds that acted basically in the way that this photograph would suggest. This is what they're like. This is a young bird with a young bird's plumage. Striated caracaras are really unusual, and it takes them 5 years to get to adult plumage. A peregrine takes about 2. But they are very, very curious. They're completely unafraid of you. They hunt, they scavenge. They're more like ravens or crows, really, in terms of their behavior, than any falcon that you would ordinarily think of. And they'll just come right up to you and start going through your bag. Just to remind you of where the Falklands are, although you're more likely to know in the UK than most people. See how close they are to the Antarctic Peninsula down here. They're really way far out. And Darwin, when he got there, stayed mostly on East Falkland, but I'll show you a place where there are an awful lot of striated caracaras still today. And that's up at the Jason Islands. You can see that little box in the corner. Steeple Jason and Grand Jason are the 2 largest of the Jason Islands. And here is Steeple Jason. This is in the wintertime, so the albatross colony that's normally there in the summertime is not there. But there are still some penguins roosting. In the summertime, this island is absolutely chock full of seabirds, penguins, albatrosses, burrowing petrels, and all of their associated chicks and eggs, which makes it a really nice place to live if you're a scavenging crow-like raptor. So there are more than 300 striated caracaras on this island, and it's not that big an island. You can walk around it in a long day. Here's a bunch of adult striated caracaras on a nearby island called New Island. But in the wintertime, these guys face a problem, which is they can't follow all these seabirds out to sea. So here's a striated caracara standing on an albatross nest on Steeple Jason, looking forlorn. And I visited in both seasons, and in winter I was really wondering if they were all going to be there or if they'd gone somewhere else, we don't know where, in search of food. And it turned out the same number were there in the winter as were there in the summer. But what they were doing was digging in the ground and subsisting by eating grass grubs and earthworms. And there were patches of ground that were so torn up that you can actually see them if you know what you're looking for in the satellite photo from space. And so you can see these large areas of land that look like they've been dug up by a rototiller or pigs or something. And if I told you, actually, no, it's falcons, you might be surprised. Here's a group of them that had assembled near the carcass of a sea lion. And we're really chowing down on that. They love that kind of thing. And this would help get them through the wintertime. There were about 50 to 75 of them all there. Oh, I've actually got the video in this clip. Let's see if this will play for you. It's a very Pleistocene kind of scene there. When you imagine there being a world with lots of big animals, with lots of scavenging animals eating them, or the Serengeti even today, there was most of the world, the temperate world was like this thousands of years ago, but in the Falklands, it still is. Now, these guys have, as you might imagine, run into some trouble with people because if you're a completely fearless animal that likes to run up and grab things from people and you look like a bird of prey and you might be interested in, say, a lamb that's been born in the field, or an injured sheep or something like that. It doesn't endear you to farmers. And in fact, a bounty was placed on them in the islands in the early 20th century. And it was removed not too long after that, but by then the damage had been done and they were only confined to the outer islands. But luckily, the Falklands consists of almost 750 islands. And most of which are very small. Not all of them were farmed, and the islands that did not have people on them became these de facto wildlife refuges that preserve the bird life of the islands, and it's all still there. It's quite an extraordinary place to visit, really. Uh, and where people tolerate them, striated caracaras are really a part of life. This is a very typical scene. This one's interested in what I'm cooking for dinner. Here's Lorraine McGill, who passed away a couple of years ago, but she lived on an island called Carcass Island, and this group of young striated caracaras is hanging out by her kitchen door because she would feed them kitchen scraps every day. I really love that there's one bird on each of the steps leading up to Lorraine there. There's one looking at my hiking gear. And another little clip here. This is how they are with objects that they have not seen before. They're really, really attracted to them. He plays with them for a while, really trying to see what he can get out of it. And this is a young bird, by the way. This bird by plumage was 1 or 2 years old. Having found out all that he can, he decides he's going to go and see what else is going on over there. They're really strong. I mean, you think he just moved that pack. Carabiner there. It's a classic. And then you can see over here to the left. See it just a minute. God, look at the size of that foot. Here's his buddy. They're all like this. This is not an unusual bird. And it's also not used to seeing people. So it's not like it's tame or it's used to handouts or anything like this. People aren't that common. And it may have never seen one before. So I'm just sitting there right next to it with my phone. And they'll do this for as long as you let them. Sometimes they'll fly away with objects that you have. They like to play a game with you where they grab the hat off your head and fly away with it. And you'll see these little bird called a synclodes will come into view here in a second, the blackish synclodes that lives in the Falklands. And they like to follow striated caracaras around and sort of clean up after them. It's like the caracaras will dig up a bunch of turf, and then the synclodes will go through the turf that the caracaras dug up. So they kind of seem like little sidekicks sometimes. Here's me taking a dinner order on New Island. Actually, what I'm doing is there's a trap under there that we set for banding them. And you just nail a piece of meat to the ground essentially and put some little bits of paracord around it with snares on them, and you can catch them. And often when you catch them and band them and let them go, they'll go and get back in the trap again because, hey, it's an easy meal. So there are actually quite a lot of striated caracaras other than in the Falklands in the UK. And that's because of this guy, Len Hill, the penguin millionaire, who founded Birdland in the Cotswolds back in the 70s and bought a couple of those islands in the Falklands and imported all sorts of birds from there. And if you go to a falconry park in the UK, odds are pretty good that they're going to have a striated caracara, and it's probably descended from 6 birds that Len Hill imported from that island I just showed you, Steeplejason. So if you want to have a close-up encounter with caracaras after this, and you live in the UK, it's probably closer than you think. Here's one named Tina who lived in Dorset, in Devon, at the Woodlands family fun park. And Tina was extraordinary because her working with her keeper there, Jeff, she could do some really unusual things. He could throw a group of stuffed animals behind him and say, go find Nemo. And she would run down and go and pick up Nemo. And he could say, wait, I've changed my mind, get Miss Piggy instead. And she would put down Nemo, pick up Miss Piggy, come back, drop it in a bucket and get a reward. And Tina liked to do this whether she was hungry or not. She just liked to play games. He could get the audience to specify whether she should retrieve a ball of a certain color, or even of a certain shape. So she seemed to be able to do things that we normally associate, with parrots, like famous parrots like Alex, um, and what we know about paracognition. Here's Tina's successor, Evita, who, as far as I know, is still at Woodlands to this day with a plush toy of one of her ancestors. This is obviously not a caracara. This is a kia, which some of you may know is an alpine parrot from New Zealand. The interesting thing is that falcons have relatively recently been revealed to be more closely related to parrots than they are to any other birds of prey. So what I really like about caracaras, or one of the many things, is that in their minds, which seems so different, you can kind of see a more parody version of what we think of when we think of as a familiar falcon. And what I think has sort of happened is that the things we think of as stereotypical falcons are actually quite diverged from what they used to be like, which was probably more like a parrot, more curious, more resourceful, more interested in play, um, more of a generalist. Here's Mr. Hudson, whom we've already talked about. One of his first experiences with birds was climbing up to a nest of crested caracaras in Argentina. And caracaras are unusual among falcons in that they build big, elaborate nests. Especially the cresteds. These things they're gigantic. Sometimes people in Argentina refer to their hair in the morning, like bedhead, as a caracaras nest. And there was a nest recently found in Brazil of this species, in a cell tower that was composed almost entirely of different gauges of wire. It wasn't just that they had found a few wires and put them in their nest. They built the whole nest out of wires and different kinds of wires, as if they had seen, okay, this is a really good building material. There's some of this around. Let's start using this stuff. Hudson called caranchos. They're called caranchos in southern South America, but he called crested caracaras lords of the feathered race. But Darwin called them ill. They said they ill become so high a rank, which kind of tells you something about the general prejudices we have about what a bird of prey is supposed to be like. We have this idea that they're these sort of noble, aloof hunters. But Hudson was I think the first European writer to really admire them, and watch them carefully. And he especially loved this species, which is a little sort of like maybe twice the size of a thrush, a species called a chimango caracara. And they're not very exceptional to look at. You see them all over the place, often in groups. And there's even a saying in Argentina, don't waste your ammunition on a chimango, as in if it's just sort of something common, annoying, and worthless. But there were some really fascinating experiments by a scientist named Laura Biondi in Argentina and her colleagues, where they took chimangos out of the wild. They took a group of, I think, 30 or 40 of them and separated them into three groups. One group, they showed a plexiglass box that you had to be able to open to get some food that was inside of it. The second group, they placed in a place where they could see the first group but couldn't get to the boxes themselves. And the third was kept out as a control. The first group did pretty well. About half of them got into the boxes. The second group, which watched that first group very intently, had over an 80% success rate in getting into the boxes. And the third group was, when they were introduced to the boxes later, had about the same success as the first group. What's the point of this? The point is that just the act of watching another caracara or another creature of any kind exploit a food resource is enough often for caracaras to be able to then exploit that resource themselves. This is really quite extraordinary in the animal world, in the behavioral study of animals. So it seems almost to be their superpower. They're really good at finding new sources of food, learning what they are quickly, and exploiting them. Hudson talked about them wading around in ponds with waders or herons and ibises, and also hanging out with flycatchers when they were feeding on termites that were flying out of the mound. Now, Amerindian people had different opinions about caracaras. They're often kind of regarded as sacred beings. These are people dressed as carunculated caracaras in Ecuador, which are known as curiquingues, both the dancers depicted here and the animals themselves. And they're a really striking resident of the high Andes if you've ever been there, up above the tree line. There's nothing else that looks like this. It looks like a brightly painted raven. And they walk around on the ground. they have spiritual associations that are mostly, I would say, very positive. They're good luck. They're associated with matrimony, um, uh, with uh, with a good harvest, um, and even well, a bit further south. This is in the Altiplano, the Central Andes, really high up. This is like 15,000 feet. Those are vicuñas in the front, in the foreground. This is where you find mountain caracaras. This one is actually standing on the ruins of Machu Picchu. And the Inca uh, used their feathers in the crown or mascapaiche that was worn by the Inca emperor. They were only the emperor was allowed to wear caracara feathers. There was something very important and significant about them. And even now they have nicknames like China Linda, which is like uh, pretty Native American girl, or Ave Maria even. Uh, and this one showed up during the pandemic at a sort of a tower block in La Paz in Bolivia. And these people who were stuck in their apartments started feeding it, and it liked the arrangement so well that it brought two colleagues back with it. They built a nest and started raising chicks as a threesome on this apartment building. Further south still, if you're going down into Tierra del Fuego, this looks like it's really high up, but down there, the mountains aren't so tall, but because it's colder, the altitude and climate are kind of proxy for one another. So there's this long ramp essentially of the Andes. As they get lower, the high elevation habitats follow them down towards the sea. And this is where you can find white-throated caracaras like this one on the left, hanging out with its buddy, a black vulture, probably thinking about scavenging a guanaco carcass that maybe a puma has killed. And a part of my book that I really loved, maybe the most of all of it, was looking at the tropical caracaras. And there's three species: black caracaras, yellow-headed caracaras, and red-throated caracaras. And to see them, I went to that place that W.H. Hudson wrote about in Green Mansions, Southern Guyana, which is one of the most intact and beautiful stretches of tropical forest in all of South America. Along with the other Guyanas, Suriname and French Guiana, there's a stretch of roadless, undeveloped tropical forest in there that's you could walk through it for almost 1,000 miles to the Atlantic coast. It is just extraordinary. And I went there to see especially this bird, red-throated caracaras. This might be the weirdest raptor on Earth, I think. They live in family groups of usually between 3 and as many as 15, 17 individuals, multiple males, multiple females. We don't know about paternity in the nest. We don't know what breeding system is going on here. They nest in giant bromeliads, which they tear a sort of platform out of, and then the only nests that have ever been found of these species have been in these gigantic bromeliads, some of them, 200 feet up in a tree. And they act almost more like a troop of monkeys than anything else. They have a territory they patrol, they fly around it every day, screaming and performing sort of these little war dances at anything that they think is a threat, and which includes you if you go to visit them. And they eat almost entirely wasps' nests. So quite a quite a strange raptor, especially when you think about the fact that it's got this bare skin on its face and throat. You're like, how on earth is it going to be able to do that? Well, I went down there with some really extraordinary people. This is Josie George, waiting in the Rio River there, which is what we ascended into the southern highlands. Rambo Roberts, little baby black caiman there, and Brian Duncan. Brian and Josie are Wapishana, and Rambo is Makushi. Because they're in Guyana, they grew up in Guyana. They all speak English. And it's really incredible to travel with South American, Native American people who speak English. It's very, very rare. The river was full of amazing and unnerving fish, like this vampire fish, or payara, and this aymara, or wolf fish, which to me looked almost like a coelacanth or something. And we ate quite a few of these fish during our trip, and I got to say they were pretty good. But being on that river was extraordinary in almost every way, but not least that you could just drop a hook in the water and catch a fish immediately. And it made the river seem almost magical. Like, what is going on with this river that there's so many fish in it? And then you have to stop and remember, no, there's nothing special about this river. It's normal. It's that every other river you've ever seen is depauperate. in comparison. And it made it a little easier to imagine how people managed to travel throughout all of South America and get from, from the Bering Strait all the way down to the bottom of South America in a few thousand years. There were always animals. There was always fish in the rivers. There were always animals in the forest that had not experienced people before, and they were so abundant that you could just sort of travel without worrying about where your next meal was going to come from. There are along the river, there were places like this where people had sharpened stone tools. These could be 5,000 years old. They could be a couple of hundred years old. There's no way of telling. Oh, I'm sorry, I should have given you a trigger warning on this. This is the other member of our expedition. This is Sean McCann and his friend, the Goliath bird-eating spider, the largest spider in the world. Sean, as you can tell, is very pleased to have made its acquaintance. He loves spiders, and both of them escaped unharmed from this moment. But Sean has been the only person to study red-throated caracaras in the wild in the last 20 years. And he found the first nest that had ever been seen and managed to document their feeding behavior by constructing a giant sort of bird feeder festooned with wasp nests in the middle of the forest, which was pretty difficult, as you might imagine. He had to wear a bee suit in the middle of the night to like move these nests and then use a guitar amp to play back caracara calls to get them to come in to this thing. Because there was speculation that these birds somehow must secrete some kind of wasp repellent. And I have some interest in trying to find out what this might be. As you probably know, there are toxic birds like the pituites in New Guinea, which have an alkaloid toxin on their feathers. So it's not impossible. Uh, they might have some chemical that they secrete. Sean wasn't able to find anything. But instead, what he thinks they're doing is exploiting the behavior of swarm-founding wasps. And if you want to know more about that, read my book. But I love that these birds are clearly Muppets, really. I mean, what would you believe that that's a falcon? What is that? There they are doing their war dance. This is the first ever photograph of a young red-throated caracara on the nest who's very surprised to see a human being 200 feet up in a tree. And you can see it's got bits of wasp comb all around it there. And also that millipede. And this is something Sean would have loved to have had time to look into further, but the adults would he put a camera on this nest, and you would see the adults bringing millipedes fairly often to the young birds. And they would hold them up to them and then bite the millipedes and drop them into the bottom of the nest. And the young birds would not eat them. So he's like, what are they doing with these things? And his idea, or one idea, is that they may be using them to deter pests because millipedes, if you've ever handled one, you know, are quite stinky. They have these wonderful things called repugnatory glands that secrete this like noxious goo that sometimes is caustic and burns you. Sometimes it just smells really bad. It's helped them stay around on land, moving slowly and peacefully for the last 200 million years. And he thinks what they may be doing is that, like capuchin monkeys, which will rub millipedes on their bodies, or lemurs in Madagascar, which will do the same thing, they may be actually using them to deter some of the many biting and sucking nasties that want to feed on you and live in you in the forest. In which case, they might not be secreting a chemical wasp repellent, but they might be using chemical technology on their nests. This is a yellow-headed caracara, and this is a young bird. The tapir that it's standing on right now there is fine. Excuse me. He's not about to make a meal of him. What he's doing is inspecting him for ticks and other ectoparasites. And I love how he's lifting his ear up. Like, anything in here? Got anything there? And tapirs, when they see a yellow-headed caracara at a riverbank, will even roll over like dogs and lay their limbs back like this and go, can you get that spot there? And they'll just pick their ticks and things off them. And they were probably doing this. They've been recorded doing this on deer and in the fur of a three-toed sloth. They were probably doing this in the days of the great South American megafauna, the giant ground sloths, the glyptodonts, boar hyenids. I mean, all of these giant animals that used to live in South America until quite recently. These guys probably knew them well and did exactly this thing. Now you can find a lot of pictures of them standing on the backs of cattle, or especially on capybaras, because it's just so much fun to see a tiny little raptor standing on a giant rodent. This is a black caracara, which looks to me like something the Addams family would keep for a pet. They live along riverbanks almost exclusively throughout the Amazon basin, the Guyana Shield, and they eat pretty much anything. They're very clever and very funny. And here's one trying to deal with a black vulture who's lording it over this pile of fish guts that Josie put on the bank of the river. And he just stood there staring at it for a long time, clearly kind of scared of the vulture, but it really wanted a meal. And so after a while, it finally just like lowered its head and just charged at the vulture, and the vulture kind of jumped back like this. And then the caracara grabbed a footful of fish guts and hopped away with it on the other foot like this. And we were just dying watching this because it was such a typical caracara move. Funny, clownish, kind of smart, easy to identify with, and effective. And this here is the Guadalupe caracara, which is extinct. It is the only bird of prey known to have been wiped out by human beings in historical time. They lived on an island called Guadalupe off of Baja California to the west. And the great bird collector Rollo Beck visited the island in 1900 and said that he saw 11 of them, shot 9 of them, the other 2 got away, and they were actually never seen again. This was after a goat farming operation had been attempted on the island that failed, but the goat farmers did not take kindly to these birds and killed them. And so this bird, unfortunately, is no more. But you can see that it looks very much like a crested caracara. It just has that fine herringbone pattern all over it. And in case you're wondering why there seems to be a human skull in a bird collection there behind him, that actually is an item held in the Smithsonian that contains, it's got a hinged panel on the back, and when you open it, there's a wren's nest inside of it. It was found in upstate New York, and a house wren had built its nest inside of there, and it was included as part of an exhibit for children in the 1890s, but it's listed in their collection as nest. This is a crested caracara, our old friend by now. This bird, you can tell by this, you can sort of see its crop bulging out a little bit. That means it's had a nice meal recently. And this bird is in Skykomish, Washington, which is just east of Seattle. And this is a wild bird. Crested caracaras are moving north. They're in the La Brea tar pits. They were found across the United States, or what's now the United States, in the Pleistocene, but essentially vanished from all but the southern parts of Texas after the megafaunal extinctions. But now they've been seen as far north as British Columbia, as Nova Scotia, Alberta. The first one ever seen in New York State was seen in 2014. And I think that the reason that they're doing this is partly because they're following an old friend. Black vultures are also expanding across the continent. They're really good at dealing with humans and human associated food sources, and that these birds are often seen preening each other, actually. And if you see a group of black vultures by the side of the road, it's worth taking a look to see if there's also a caracara lurking in there. But I think part of what's attracted them is a new predator that's been introduced that rivals anything that ever existed in the Pleistocene, far more effective than saber-toothed cats or anything like that, and that's cars. If you think of this highway system as a giant bird feeder for scavenging birds, I looked it up in I think 2016, an estimate of the number of deer killed on major highways in the United States equaled the wildebeest population of the Serengeti. And that's not, including the skunks and foxes and coyotes and raccoons, dogs and cats and deer, no, I mentioned deer. Never mind, strike that. That accumulate on the side of the road every morning. You have these wonderful, long, orderly places that you can with perches above them where you can look down and you can go and get a meal every day. So I think they're learning to exploit that and making a comeback, and you're witnessing a rare reversal of one of the Pleistocene extinctions in this bird. And this is my last slide. This is the island of Diego Ramirez. It's south even of Cape Horn at the far southern tip of South America. It's the last place where the South American continental plate rises above the ocean. It's got penguins on it, it's got albatrosses, and it has striated caracaras, which is as close as I think any of the falcons living today have come to what was, if you think about where the parrots came from and where they went. The oldest parrots live now in Australasia. I think this suggests that there was an ancestral homeland of Antarctica for this lineage that split then into parrots and falcons. So with that, I will now stop monologuing and start talking.
Well, wonderful talk is all I can say to you, Jonathan. And, it's fascinating. I mean, I cannot accept that the bird that I held dearly, the falcon family, as a member of the mighty raptor family, hawks and buzzards and what have you, is actually related to parrots. I find that so difficult to comprehend. In
Well,
fact,
most parrots will eat meat if you give it to them. We think of them as vegetarians, and a lot of them are, but I think that's not what they originally were. I think that was the ancestor was probably more raptorial.
and what does make a parrot or a falcon like a parrot?
Like, how are they similar?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, physiologically, there are lots of similarities. A feather morphologist I spoke to, Carla Dove, who was the one holding the Guadalupe caracara, had noticed that the microstructures of falcon and parrot feathers were more similar than they were to the microstructures of hawks and eagles many years ago, but never but just thought, huh, that's funny. And then, or morphologists dealing with uh, the shapes of bones within the birds had also noticed this. Now, an interesting thing about the true falcons is that they've actually lost a bone in the foot that caracaras have. Caracaras are almost all very good at walking around on the ground. They have no trouble doing it. They're really fast. Darwin noted that striated caracaras run, he said, like pheasants. And that's not something that is easy to imagine a falcon doing. But for if you've read that, John Alec Baker's book, The Peregrine, um, where he describes the peregrines in East Anglia, there is a scene where uh, he sees one taking a bath in a stream, and he watches this peregrine go in up to its neck in the stream, and then come back out and stand there, kind of fluffing its feathers. And he mentions that it looks almost parrot-like in its movements, and I love that moment because he had no way of knowing how right he was.
Wow. Quick question. I mean, I haven't got a great deal of time left, but why Caracaras? What's actually fascinated you, or why were you drawn to them in the first place?
Well, I first went to the Falklands almost by accident. I had a strange traveling fellowship called the Thomas J. Watson Fellowship, which funds graduating seniors from some U.S. colleges to do a project they design themselves in one or more non-U.S. countries that they've never been to before. And mine was a project about community life at the ends of the earth. So I went to some of the remotest places I could find, and one of them was the Falklands. Now I was interested in the people and the way people lived, but I met an ornithologist named Robin Woods, who passed away a few years ago, uh, who had written a guide to the birds of the Falklands. He was staying in the same little tiny boarding house I was staying in, and he was about to do a survey of striated caracaras in the outer islands of the Falklands that had never been done before. So I persuaded him to take me along, and so my that was my first real birding experience was being in the outer islands of the Falkland Archipelago, looking at penguins and albatrosses and caracaras and Cobb's wrens and cormorants, and just like it just absolutely blew my mind. But it was really nicely contained because even there's about 60 breeding species in the Falklands. It's a number you can get your head around, and they're really easy to see. Even the snipe, you can just kind of walk up to them. So very different from like going to a tropical forest where all the birds are there, but they often you can't see them. Uh, so it was just an absolutely extraordinary experience. And meeting these caracaras and their personality, um, it's like they walk up to you and they ask you, it's like they want to know what you're doing there. They're like, "What business do you have here?" Like this, they really look into you, um, and they seem very conscious in a way that few animals I've ever met do. And I was just smitten immediately. I was like, "What? Why is this all this sort of magical seeming animal doing at this far end of the world, and only here?" And that's part of the riddle that I tried to tackle, both in a degree I pursued after that, and then in this book. Because Darwin, it turns out, it had the same question and never figured it out.
Wow. I mean, I've noticed that the book has been lauded, and I love one of the quotes that is quoted in your biography, which is that someone said, one reviewer said, it's like calling the book, to call it a book on birds, or, it's not the right thing because it's like calling Moby Dick a whaling manual. It's obviously very much more than just a book about a family of birds. And being on the Falkland Islands is an amazing place to discover your interest in,
Yes,
because having been there, I know exactly what you're talking about.
it felt kind of almost fated. I really felt like they were asking me to do something for them. And I know that's silly, but it's nonetheless it stuck with me. I felt like they had something to teach me and something to show me, and there was something I owed them. Thank you, Dennis. Um, the
Excuse me.
uh, and it just writing this book was, I felt like I was doing the thing that they asked me to do. I mean, it was 25 years from the when I met them to when the book came out, so it took quite some time to do.
Okay. We haven't got a great deal of time yet left. I just want to ask you, what are you working on next?
I'm working on a book about the called The Secret Land, the Once and Future Life of Antarctica. As I've sort of hinted at there, the falcons kind of pointed me towards Antarctica and its importance in determining the way the world is now. And I think I wanted to write a book about Antarctica that's not about penguins, seals, whales, melting ice caps, or polar explorers, but everything else is fair game. And it considers Antarctica's past, its present, and its future. Um, and I feel really lucky at having stumbled on this subject because obviously it's massive. I'll never cover it comprehensively. But it's a way to write a book about the natural world that's not depressing.
Yeah.
Um, and and that I think Antarctica, we think of it as distant, cold, and dead. And the thing is, it's not really that far away. It's not been cold for most of its existence, and it has never been dead.
Have there ever been humans on Antarctica?
There have been no native people in Antarctica that we know of. It would
But
have been real hard for people to get to. And you remember, people didn't cross the Bering Land Bridge until about 20,000 years ago.
fascinating. Okay, Jonathan,
Yes.
what is your favorite Caracara?
Well, it has to be the striated caracara. I mean, I'm hopelessly biased. They're only about in the wild, the population is about 25 to 100 to 3,000 adult birds. That puts them in the same realm as like giant pandas. And it's they don't seem like a rare bird when you meet them, but they are. And one of my hopes is that the book and just people's interest in general in this incredibly charismatic species will help people to think about ways that we might um, provide a place for them to live, especially because the rising sea levels are only going to make the islands where they live smaller.
Yeah, well, it's a very sad thing. I'm
Thank you, John.
talking about places. If you could be anywhere in the world, where would you be right now?
I was doing some research for the Antarctica book in Tasmania last year, and I would love to go back to Tasmania anytime. That place is extraordinary. For if you're into natural history, it's got enough to occupy you for many lifetimes, and it's just beautiful and strange, familiar and alien. I was completely smitten with it. So there's your answer.
Yeah, I've always wanted to go to Tasmania ever since I was a kid. I still haven't made it there, but I think for
I
all
liked
of
it better than New Zealand, if I'm allowed to say that. It's really and it's not as appreciated, I think, for its natural history as New Zealand is. Even though New Zealand's amazing, but Tasmania is, I think, even more amazing.
yeah, I mean, I'd love to go and try and find the devil.
Oh yeah, they're there. You can see them if you
Maybe the wolf.
find that.
Maybe the wolf. I'm thinking
Pardon?
Tasmanian wolf, perhaps.
Oh, the tiger. Yeah, yeah, the thylacine. Yeah.
The
Good
tiger.
luck. Good luck with that.
Okay. Well, listen, Jonathan, thank you very much for sparing your time to educate us on the wonderful world of the Caracara. And
This book, I must say, it has a different cover in the UK, and for reasons that I do not understand, this book did quite well in the US, and in the UK sold almost nothing. So it would really help me out if you go to your local bookshop and request it, or if you must go on Amazon and buy it. But I promise it's good. Margaret Atwood loved it. Laurie Anderson loved it. It's not the fault of this book that it didn't sell in the UK.
And Jennifer Ackerman as well, no less,
Jennifer Ackerman. Yep.
who's also been a guest on In Conservation with. So you must pick up Jonathan's book, A Most Remarkable Creature, The Hidden Life of the World's Smartest Bird of Prey. Okay, so please pick that up for Jonathan if you live in England, in Britain, but anywhere else in the world, do so as well. Um, we've got other episodes of In Conservation coming with. So should I say In Conservation with coming up even. So please stay tuned. And also, as I said before, like and subscribe and follow us for more. So, Jonathan, thank you very much. Good luck with the book and great subject, and good luck with the next one as well.
Thank you, David.
And Zoomers, thank you very much as well. And until we all meet again, we have to all keep looking up.